Halfway through Can't Help Falling in Love, Elvis stopped. The house lights dimmed. In the front row, a widow clutched her hands, one bare finger catching his eye. Moments later, the arena held its breath. If you believe moments of kindness can outshine fame itself, stay with me. This night in the mid-70s proved why Elvis was more than the king of rock and roll. The first guitar chord cracked through the chatter like a lightning bolt. It was late summer, mid-70s, in Memphis's Mid-South Coliseum. The night air outside thick with heat, the inside electric with 18,000 fans buzzing in their seats. From the moment the spotlights bloomed, and Elvis strode out in his white jumpsuit, gold belt flashing under the stage lights, the crowd was his. But he wasn't scanning the rafters or the balcony tonight. His eyes were low, searching the front row. About 6 seats from the center aisle, a woman sat motionless amid the swaying, screaming sea of fans. Her hands were folded tightly in her lap, fingers laced as if she was holding them together for dear life. One hand caught the light in a strange way, not because of what was on it, but because of what wasn't. The fourth finger was bare. 2 women nearby leaned toward each other, whispering just loud enough for the man behind them to hear. That's Margaret. She lost her wedding ring last month. Her husband's been gone 2 years. The words passed like a ripple, swallowed by the roar, as the first verse kicked in. Elvis's voice rolled through the arena, rich and warm. He moved with easy command, but every few beats, his eyes drifted back to her, a glance, then again, and again. The smell of popcorn drifted from the concession stands. The faint hiss from the amplifiers filled the space between notes. Somewhere up in the catwalks, the slow sweep of a spotlight carved a dusty beam through the air. Song after song, he kept the crowd wrapped around it. But when the opening chords of Love Me Tender began, something shifted. Elvis stepped back from the mic, letting the guitar fill the space. His head tilted toward the front row, eyes locked on Margaret. Then, he stopped singing. The band faltered, sound thinning in an instant. Conversations cut off mid-laugh. Even the rustle of programs in the mezzanine stilled. The king of rock and roll didn't miss beats. He didn't miss notes, but he was missing something right now, and it was sitting just feet away from him. For a long moment, nothing moved. The arena seemed to lean forward, and then Elvis took a single step toward the edge of the stage. Why would Elvis stop a song for one woman in the crowd? Elvis raised his right hand slightly, not to the crowd, but to his band. The drummer's sticks hovered mid-air. The rhythm softened to a slow, heartbeat thump from the bass. Guitar strings rang with a delicate, uncertain shimmer. Elvis knelt at the edge of the stage, one knee pressing into the white fabric of his jumpsuit. The spotlight tightened, catching the dust in its beam, until it seemed like there was nothing else in the world but him and the woman in seat A6. He leaned into the microphone, voice low. "Ma'am, what's your name?" Her answer trembled up from the front row. "Margaret, from Memphis." She nodded, eyes shining in the light, but fixed on him like no one else existed in the room. The rest of the audience was silent. Thousands of people frozen mid-breath. Even the sound of the air conditioning vents seemed to fade away. Then Elvis reached into the deep pocket sewn into the side of his jumpsuit. Slowly, deliberately, he pulled out a small square of folded white cloth. His gaze didn't leave hers. "Somebody told me," he said. "You lost something. Something precious." A ripple of soft gasps spread through the first few rows. In the corner of the spotlight, a security guard stepped forward from the aisle, carrying a small velvet box. Elvis took it, held it in the palm of his hand, and flicked open the lid. Inside, a simple gold wedding band, catching the light with a warmth that was almost alive. The crowd shifted, whispers darting from row to row. Elvis's voice softened. "A friend found this backstage, said it might belong to you." Margaret's hands flew to her mouth. Her head shook, once, twice, as tears welled instantly in her eyes. From the cheap seats to the box level, you could see her chest rise and fall. This wasn't just a piece of metal. This was a link to a life she'd shared, a life gone, but not forgotten. She reached forward, but Elvis didn't hand it over. Instead, A small smile tugged at his lips. First he said, "You gotta help me finish this song." The crowd reacted in a wave. Laughter, applause, a few scattered cheers, but it quickly fell back into reverent silence. Elvis extended his hand, palm open, fingers relaxed. For a heartbeat she hesitated. Then slowly, she placed her hand in his. It was a small hand, trembling just enough for him to notice. He gave it the gentlest squeeze, guiding her toward the low steps at the side of the stage. The spotlight widened. Fans leaned over the barricade, cameras ready, but no one shouted. This was no ordinary fan interaction. This felt sacred. When she reached the step, Elvis helped her up, steadying her by the elbow. The guitarist played a soft lilting fill to bridge the silence. Margaret stood beside him now, only inches away. She glanced at the ring again, still nestled in the box. The arena exhaled together, and yet in that moment, everyone seemed to be holding the same thought. Why did Elvis have her ring, and how had it found its way back to him? Elvis turned his back to the audience for just a moment, as if gathering the right words, then faced them again, microphone in hand. "Folks," he began, "here's something you don't hear every night." He motioned for Margaret to sit on a chair brought up from the wings, positioned right beside the stage steps. She lowered herself carefully, still looking at the ring in his hand, like she wasn't sure it was real. The crowd's attention locked in, their cheers fading into a deep waiting quiet. Elvis explained that 3 days earlier, one of his stage crew had been cleaning under the front rows of a small venue from his last performance. Lodged between the wooden floorboards and a steel support beam, they'd found it had dust on it, Elvis said, turning it slowly in his fingers, but inside it had a name. He held the ring closer to the mic, tilting it under the lights so the engraving glinted. "Forever, Tom and Margaret." The audience reacted, a collective murmur rolling across the Coliseum like a soft wave. "The crew didn't know whose it was," Elvis continued, "but I recognized it. I'd seen that name before." He glanced at Margaret with a half smile. "A while back, I got a letter from a lady in Memphis. Told me she'd lost her husband in '73. Said she came to my shows to feel close to him again. That letter stayed with me." A rustle of emotion moved through the crowd. People shifted in their seats, some touching their own rings, or holding hands tighter. Elvis said the moment he heard about the find, he told the crew, "Don't give it to the box office, don't send it by mail, I'm bringing it myself." He turned to Margaret. "I figured maybe tonight was the night." She nodded, her lips trembling. "It's mine," she whispered, voice breaking. The band, still holding the soft undercurrent of music, stayed perfectly in step with the moment. Elvis stepped closer, lifted her left hand gently, and slid the ring back where it had once lived. Her fingers closed over it instantly, like she was afraid it might vanish again. The crowd erupted into applause, but Elvis leaned in before stepping back, saying something the microphone didn't catch. Margaret's tears broke into a brief surprised laugh. She shook her head, still smiling through. The audience reacted again, curious now, wondering what he'd said to change her tears into laughter. Elvis gave the crowd a knowing grin, but didn't explain. Instead, he turned to his guitarist and gave a quick nod. The opening notes of "Can't Help Falling in Love" floated into the air, but the answer to that whispered line would stay tucked away for just a little longer. What did Elvis whisper, and why did it make her laugh? The first soft notes from the guitarist shimmered into the quiet. Elvis was still holding Margaret's hand. He leaned in once more, this time speaking into the mic so the whole arena could hear. "I told her, her husband's probably yelling at me right now for taking so long to give it back." Laughter and applause broke the tension, a warm wave washing over the stage. Margaret smiled through her tears, shaking her head like she could hear her late husband's voice in the joke. The band swelled, building the familiar rise of "Can't Help Falling in Love." Elvis glanced at her, then to the crowd. "You folks mind if she helps me finish this one?" The arena answered with a roar. Margaret's eyes widened, but Elvis gave her a reassuring nod. The mic stand lowered slightly to her height. She gripped it with one hand, the other still clutching the scarf he had just pulled from around his neck. Deep blue, soft and warm from the stage lights. They began the verse together. Her voice was fragile at first, nearly lost under the music, but Elvis turned toward her, drawing her. His low harmony wrapped around hers like a guide rope. The crowd caught on and began to sing with them. Thousands of voices swayed in unison, a single chorus lifting to the rafters. Lights swept over the audience, illuminating pockets of people, couples with arms around each other, strangers smiling through tears, hands raised like they were holding the moment in place. Margaret's voice grew stronger, carried by the crowd's support. On the final line, Elvis let her finish alone, his own voice dropping out entirely. She did it. The last note held just long enough to echo back from the far walls. Thunderous applause. People stood from their seats, stomping the floor, clapping above their head. Elvis draped the scarf fully over her shoulders and kissed her cheek. The cameras flashed so rapidly it looked like the whole front row was lit by strobe. Then, into the mic he said, "Tom would want you to keep dancing." Margaret laughed again, shaking her head but holding the scarf tight against her. The band played the final chord. Elvis stepped back, arm extended toward her like she was the headliner. She gave a small, almost shy bow, but the cheers only grew louder. The crowd began chanting her name. It felt like the ending of a fairy tale, but the night's biggest surprise was still waiting for her, and it wouldn't happen under stage lights. What could Elvis possibly do for her after this? 7 days after the concert, Margaret was back to her quiet routines: coffee in the morning, a walk to the corner store, evenings with the radio low. That afternoon, a knock came at her front door. On the porch sat a small plain cardboard box, no return address except a Memphis postmark. The handwriting on the label was bold but neat: Mrs. Margaret Lewis. She carried it to her kitchen table, her fingers tracing the tape before pulling it loose. Inside, under a layer of soft tissue paper, was a Polaroid photograph. It was from the concert. She was standing on stage, scarf over her shoulders, Elvis beside her with that easy grin. The moment caught mid-laughter. Across the bottom, in gold ink, were the words, "For Margaret, keep the faith." She set the photo down carefully, like it might fade if she touched it too long. Beneath it lay a small leather pouch, no bigger than her palm. She opened it to find a single guitar pick, ivory-colored, edges worn from use. Pressed into the center were the initials EP in tiny block letters. Her breath caught. She turned the pick over in her hand, feeling its smoothness, the faint groove where a thumb had rested hundreds of times. There was also a folded note, written in the same hand as the address: "Margaret, you'll always have a seat in the front row." The words were simple, but they landed with the weight of something far more than a concert memento. Margaret placed the pic next to a framed photo of her husband, Tom, on the living room mantel. The Polaroid leaned beside it. For the first time in a long while, she found herself smiling without needing to force it. News traveled fast in her neighborhood. Within days, neighbors were stopping by, some just to see the photo, others to hear her tell the story again. She would describe the moment he saw her, the way he stopped everything, the sound of thousands holding their breath. But when she reached the part about the package, she always paused for a moment, letting people picture it before she showed them the pic and the note. And every time, without fail, the listener would shake their head and say the same thing. Only Elvis would do that. For Margaret, the gift wasn't about the value of the items. It was about the way a man who had everything took the time to notice someone who had lost so much. That night on stage had been a once-in-a-lifetime moment. But this small box left on her porch was proof it hadn't ended when the lights went down. The story might have ended there, but it was only beginning to ripple through Memphis and beyond. By the end of that week, Margaret's story wasn't just hers anymore. It was Memphis's. Word spread first through her neighbors, then at the corner store, and by Sunday morning, it had reached the pews of her church. People who hadn't been at the concert spoke of it like they were there, retelling every detail as if they'd witnessed the scarf, the ring, the song. At Graceland tours, guides began slipping it into their one would say, there was a night at the Mid-South Coliseum when Elvis stopped the whole show for a widow named Margaret. Visitors leaned in, hungry for a story that showed a different side of the king, not the performer, but the man. Margaret kept the scarf folded in a cedar box at the foot of her bed. On anniversaries she would take it out, still faintly scented with cologne and the warm trace of stage lights. She never wore it again. It wasn't clothing. It was a moment preserved. Those who were in the arena that night described it the same way. You could feel love in the air,
said one man who'd been sitting in the upper level. It wasn't just a concert, it was a homecoming. The footage, shot by a fan with a small handheld camera, was grainy but unmistakable. It surfaced decades later on an online forum dedicated to Elvis's live performances. You could see the instant he noticed Margaret. You could see the pause, the approach, the moment her hands covered her mouth. The comments poured in. Thousands of people shared stories of meeting Elvis, of small acts of kindness he'd shown when no cameras were around. Others admitted they'd never met him, but had grown up on tales like this, moments where the music took a back seat to humanity. Margaret never sought interviews, or tried to make her story bigger than it was. If asked, she would simply say, "He didn't just give me back a ring, he gave me back a little piece of my life." The scarf, the photo, the guitar pick, the note, all of it stayed together, tucked away but never forgotten. Years later, when Margaret passed, her niece found the cedar box and its contents. She didn't sell, she kept them exactly as they were, as if breaking the set would somehow dim the story. Because the real treasure wasn't the objects, it was the night a man who had sold millions of records stopped mid-song because one woman in the crowd mattered more than the music. Sometimes the smallest act of kindness can echo longer than the loudest applause. If this moved you, share it with someone who believes kindness can stop a room, and tell me, what's the most unforgettable act of generosity you've ever witnessed?